decide where she is where it relates to Syria. She has no idea. She has no plan to keep America safe. Nothing. Nothing. This is it's just scary. Here's part of this is Trump right now. We'll just play a little bit of this. This is him talking right now, specifically giving his foreign policy speech from Youngstown, Ohio.
Obviously used for ransom. Worst of all, the nuclear deal puts Iran, the #1 state sponsor of radical Islamic terrorism, on a path to nuclear weapons. In short, the Obama-Clinton foreign policy has unleashed ISIS, destabilized the Middle East, and put the nation of Iran, which chants death to America, in a dominant position of regional power and, in fact, aspiring to be a dominant world power. It all began in 2009 with what has become known as President Obama's Global Apology Tour. We all remember. In a series of speeches, President Obama described America as arrogant, dismissive, derisive, and a colonial power. He was describing us. He informed other countries that he would be speaking up about America's past errors. He pledged that we would no longer be a senior partner that sought to dictate our terms. He lectured CIA officers of the need to acknowledge their mistakes and described Guantanamo Bay as a rallying cry for our enemies. Perhaps no speech was more misguided than President Obama's speech to the Muslim world delivered in Cairo, Egypt, 2009. I remember it well. In winning the Cold War, President Ronald Reagan repeatedly touted the superiority of freedom over communism and called the USSR the evil empire. Yet when President Obama delivered his address in Cairo, no such moral courage could be found or would be found. Instead of condemning the oppression of women and gays in many Muslim nations, and the systematic violations of human rights or the financing of global terrorism, President Obama tried to draw an equivalency between our human rights record, and remember this, our human rights and theirs. The records are unbelievable and unmistakable. His naive words were followed by even more naive actions. The failure to establish a new status of forces agreement in Iraq and the election-driven timetable for withdrawal surrendered our gains in that country and led directly to the rise of ISIS, without question. The failures in Iraq were compounded by Hillary Clinton's disaster, total disaster, in Libya. President Obama has since said that he regrets, and really regrets, Libya and the mistake he made. He considers it his worst mistake. According to then Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, the invasion of Libya was nearly a split decision. But Hillary Clinton's forceful advocacy for the intervention was the deciding factor. That's why we went in. With one episode of bad judgment after another, Hillary Clinton's policies launched ISIS onto the world stage. Yet, as she threw the Middle East into violent turmoil, things turned out really to be not so hot for our world and our country, the Middle East in particular. The Clintons made almost $60 million in gross income while she was Secretary of State. It is unbelievable. Incident after incident proves again and again Hillary Clinton lacks the judgment, as said by Bernie Sanders, stability and temperament, and the moral character to lead our nation. Importantly, she also lacks the mental and physical stamina to take on ISIS and all of the many adversaries we face, not only in terrorism, but in trade and every other challenge we must confront to turn our great country around. It is now time for a new approach. Our current strategy of nation building and regime change is a proven absolute failure. We have created the vacuums that allow terrorism to grow and thrive. I was an opponent of the Iraq War from the beginning. A major difference between me and my opponent. Though I was a private citizen whose personal opinions on such matters were really not sought, I nonetheless publicly expressed my private doubts about the invasion. I was against it, believe me. 3 months before the invasion, I said in an interview with Neil Cavuto, to whom I offer my best wishes for a speedy recovery, that, quote, perhaps we shouldn't be doing it yet, and that the economy is a much bigger problem. In August of 2004, very early, right after the conflict, I made a detailed statement to Esquire magazine in an interview. Here is the quote in full. Look at the war in Iraq and the mess we're in. I would never have handled it that way. This was right after the invasion. Does anybody really believe that Iraq is going to be a wonderful democracy where people are going to run down to the voting box and gently put in their ballot, and the winner is happily going to go and step up and lead the country? Come on. I then
we're carrying
continued.
part of Donald Trump's
2 minutes
speech.
after
He's
we leave,
giving an economic
there's going to be
speech
a revolution.
from Youngstown, Ohio. We do have some bills to pay, but we're also going to talk